Hello, my name's Crystal. This past year was my first year beekeeping, so I was asked to give a little video on how that went for me. Just to share with you guys. It's a big step to do, and it's a little exciting and definitely very nerve-wracking. I'd been thinking about keeping bees for a while, and we had moved the summer before, so new lot out in the country. Figured if we were going to jump into it, be a great time to do it. Um, but had a lot of questions about what to do, what kind of bees to get, where to buy them, where to put them, how to care for them. Did a ton of research, but the more I researched stuff, it seemed like the more questions I had. Uh, if I would have just waited until I was taking the class that you guys are going through right now, I probably would have answered most of what I was wondering about. Um, but anyways, made it through the class and answered most of those questions, like I said, and decided what bees I wanted and where to get them. So got them ordered, went through Let It Be in Greenville, which was a great store, and they sponsor the club. Um, and we went down in April, um, middle of April, I think it was the 14th, and picked up our bees. I was kind of scrambling, trying to get the stand built and decide where I was going to put them. They ended up coming in quite a bit earlier than what I was expecting. Um, but either way, even though we were kind of rushed into it, super excited. We go down to Greenville, pick up the bees. Um, they were great, told us exactly how to install them and what to do with them. It was a pretty warm day. Even though it was in April, I want to say it was in the 60s maybe. Um, and I had my truck. We put them in the bed of the truck, and I was worried the whole way home that I was gonna cook them because they were underneath the tonneau cover. So rushed home. It was only a half-hour drive, and the bees were totally fine when we got them home. I put the two nuke boxes that you can see underneath the hives there next to the hives, kind of let them get used to it. And when I went to go put them in, I was so worried about myself, I didn't realize that my dog had followed me down there. The second that I opened up the nukes, the bees weren't real thrilled after getting bounced around in the back of the truck for a half hour, and the dog got stung a couple times. He was fine, but he still does not go back down by the bees ever since then. Um, I got stung that very first day one time on the hand. It was my own fault. I was so nervous that I ended up squishing a bee while I was putting them in the hive, but everything went good. Bees went in there, no issues other than that. And we just kind of let the bees do their thing. You can see, put some sugar water on the hives for them just to help them get going. Eventually, I switched that out to an internal feeder just to help with robbing. But we'll talk about that later in the class. One of the first issues that I came across was the bees were building comb, but they weren't building it in that nice, pretty uniform pattern that you normally see going across the frames. They were building it in this weird, wonky pattern, sticking out, multiple layers. I kept scraping it off, so hoping that they would rebuild correctly, but they just kept rebuilding the exact same way that they had it. That's how they wanted it. What I eventually ended up doing was taking some brand new frames and melting about a pound of beeswax. And I think I got almost 20 frames that waxed out of that pound. But I took a foam brush and brushed it onto the frames. And ever since I started doing that, the bees built the frames out perfectly uniform for the most part, and I didn't have any issues with wonky foam. They also built it out a lot quicker. I think they just like that extra wax on the frames. One of the most exciting days, probably a few weeks after we put the bees in the hives, was when I found the queen for the first time. When I got the nukes, the queens were unmarked. I'd seen them a couple times briefly, or at least I thought I saw them, and then I couldn't find them again. Finally saw the queen for sure. Ended up using one of the queen marking tools and putting a dot on the queen. Was a little nervous that I would hurt the queen or do something that would hurt the hive, but it ended up going great. The reason I wanted to get a mark on the queen was another issue that I was running into now is we had such a strong dandelion flow going that my hives were trying to swarm. So because of all the dandelion nectar and just nectar in general coming into the hives, the new hives didn't have enough drawn out frames to fill with honey. So the whole hive was jam packed full of honey, and the queen had nowhere else to lay. I didn't have any other drawn out frames to put on the hive. So I was kind of just having to wait and hope for the best. I ended up calling a couple people that were in the club. Uh, they gave me some suggestions on how to manage the hives to try and prevent them from swarming because I didn't want the queen to leave with half my bees. I didn't have all that many to begin with anyway. Um, what they told me, I don't know if I really listened exactly what they said now that I've learned more, but what I did ended up working. The bees never did swarm. Um, and everything ended up being good. It was just a ton of work. I was having to go in every 3 days and check for queen cells, and uh, but it was worth it. This spring there were a lot of swarms going on. So once people found out that I was keeping bees, I got a couple calls saying that they had seen swarms or that they had a swarm in their yard. Um, Took advantage of that and went out and caught the swarms. Um, Most people call somebody off the Brown County Beekeeping Association page. They have a page with information on swarm catching and who to reach out to come help for that. If you run into that, don't worry about it. Just look up that page, look up somebody near you, and they'll come out and help. Nobody has an issue with it. Um, but because I went out and caught a couple, my apiary started growing. Um, the two little hives on the right, those were in an attempt to keep my bees from swarming. So I took a couple swarm cells, put them in there, and actually ended up getting a couple extra small resource hives out of them. About this time, once I filled that entire stand with hives, I realized I was hooked and into the hobby a little bit deeper than I intended to be right off the bat. I think this was early June at this point, so it didn't take long. One of the other things that you can see in this photo is there's an electric fence now around the hives. That was put there because we had a bear in our neighborhood. It attacked both of our, or didn't really attack, but it destroyed both neighbors' bird feeders, but it never did mess with the hives. But too many people in the area have had issues with bears, so I didn't want to risk it. Um, so put the electric fence up and never did have an issue the rest of summer. We kept seeing the bear, but it never bothered it. Another thing that I was pretty surprised with is once the bees started drawing out the frames, they drew them out really quick. So they filled the frames with wax and honeycomb, and I actually started being able to put honey supers on. Everything that I looked up and said you could get honey your first year, but don't expect it. So that's kind of what I was going off of. But just with the strong nectar flow that I had in my area and a little bit of luck, we ended up being able to extract our first honey. That was super exciting. It was a little nerve wracking, kind of overwhelming because that was one part of the process that I never really looked into. Wasn't something I was expecting to have to do. So I focused on how to care for the bees rather than how to extract the honey. Did some quick research, called a couple more people once again, and with some advice from other club members, took the frames of honey out and extracted them successfully, and we got some amazing honey out of it. Towards the end of summer, we had our mite population on the hives just explode. I've been doing mite checks. The mites are a little parasite that live on the bees. They carry all sorts of diseases. They're terrible for the bees. One of the most important topics of the whole class is going to be the mites, and definitely pay attention to that and take it seriously. I was doing mite checks throughout the summer, maybe once a month or so, every month and a half. And in the beginning, it was mite levels of 0. And then in July, I had 2 in each of the hives, or at least 2 in each of the original hives. And then all of a sudden, in August, it jumped up to 30, which is way too high. 2 is kind of okay. 30 is terrible. So I had to treat for the mites. Once again, called people from the club, did some more research. There's some really good resources out there for different treatment types. Decided to go with Formic Pro, put it on there, and you can see the bees hanging on the outside of the hive on a couple of those. And that's from the treatment. It's kind of a stronger one, but it did a great job. By the end of the year, or when I was prepping for winter, every hive that I had was back down to 0 mites when I was doing the checks. So feel pretty confident going into winter that at least that part I had a handle back on. Winter came way quicker than I expected. I knew it was coming, and then all of a sudden it was there. So I felt kind of behind prepping the bees. Had to make sure that they had enough honey in the hives to make it through the winter. Trying to get the hive set up with the correct boxes on for winter and wrapped with insulation. There's tons of different opinions on correct ways of doing everything in beekeeping, but I found especially with how to overwinter. I picked one, and we're going to try it this year, and if it does good, we'll continue on with that for next year, and if not, we'll adjust. That's one thing you'll see with beekeeping is you'll constantly hear people say if you ask 10 beekeepers one question, you're going to get 11 answers. Nobody's wrong. It's everybody has their own opinion and different ways of doing it. Best thing that I found is asking all 10 people and then kind of thinking about your situation, trying to adapt the information you get to your situation. Make a decision that you think is best for you, and it's going to be a ton of learning the first year. I'm sure next year and the year after it's going to continue that way. So, yeah, don't be afraid to try new things. The most helpful resources that I came across, even though I spent a ridiculous amount of time reading different articles, Googling things, watching YouTube, and listening to podcasts about beekeeping over the first year, and it was all valuable to some extent. But you do have to be careful of where you're getting your information from. But the most helpful resource by far was talking to other beekeepers in the club. Every single person that I came to with a question was more than happy to help out, and it was definitely refreshing having that attitude where everybody's positive and just trying to help each other out. It's going to be quite the process, but it's a lot of fun and it's a lot to learn. So look forward to it. And if you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask anybody.